I think we are live, so I'm very excited. The one and only Mr. Kurt Peterson, I'm so happy to have you as one of the guests of the BBetter Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be catching up again.
I think I told you about the story of how the podcast, the idea of the podcast started. It was during COVID, and I just realized I have a lot of friends who are doing great in terms of their career. They're professional. They align with the values that I try to promote. Great leaders, very humble. And I just want to keep in touch with them and continue to learn what they've been doing and continue to learn from them. And you're a great example of that. Somebody that I respect, I admire, and I love. And so I'm thankful that you're here.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and have a lot of great memories about how our relationship began. So I think we'll probably get into some of that.
So why don't we start there? And maybe for those who don't know you, maybe you can introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you, and also tell maybe how we met. I think that would be a fun story to tell.
Right. So I started out as professionally as an engineer, a process engineer, and had been probably before we met the several years had been working in the pharmaceutical industry. Was there for a while and was looking to make a change. And so I had an opportunity that came by way of a headhunter, and it was for Black & Decker. And it took a little while for that one to develop. But eventually, after a phone interview, I was invited to come on site in Southern California for a full day of interviews. And I remember that day very clearly. I think it was in December, maybe. And I met with, of course, several of the executives that I'd be working with, but I also met with you, and you interviewed me. And I remember that in particular because when you're going through interviews, it's one thing to be talking to your potential superiors and the executive team that you'd be supporting, but it's a different thing when you're being interviewed by somebody who would be on your team. And I remember being very aware of that and just thinking it's different. And you can't fake your way out of an interview with someone who would be part of your team, because you just don't want to either. But it was a very different dynamic that I remember. But I also remember having that conversation. I felt like it was really quite transparent, and it went very well. And I thought, well, shoot, if I get this opportunity, I think I'm going to really enjoy working with Carlos. And so I did, and moved the family out to California and started there at HHI together. And it was the start of a number of really fun years together.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. See, I didn't remember that part of the story, that I interview you in part of the team, and it was such a fun season, isn't it? Because I think later, I remember there was this transportation crisis, and I was moved to be part of your team in the supply chain, and you were really good at building a very strong team of Lean Six Sigma black belts. And one of the things I remember is that the meetings that we had, you always added this fun factor at the beginning. Remember that? You always would start with, hey, let's talk about something fun. And that's a lesson that I continue to practice even today. But you want to reference any of that season when we were working as a team with, we say hi to Bob Hoens, Francisco Canseco, and John Stepney, and others that were in the team.
No, I remember what you're talking about, because, and I think in some ways we didn't realize the degree to which we were ahead of our time there. And because we had a distributed team, you and I were together in person in Lake Forest, but the rest of the team was distributed across the country and even into Canada. And so one of the challenges that I think we felt was, how do you build a team culture with a distributed team? And this was a long time ago. And so that was the point of what you referenced, which I think we referred to as virtual team building at the beginning of every call, to try to be intentional about building the culture of a team. And you look back and you think, well, shoot, now you have to do that all the time. Makes it all the more interesting. We did it way back then. There was one other memory that I had as I was thinking about this, that for me is one of my most favorite memories of when we were working together. And I don't mean to embarrass you by this, but I'm going to give you this memory anyway.
I'm excited.
I think by this time we had been working together for a couple of years. And one day I got a call from, I think, a director and a manager together in training and development. And they wanted to talk to me about you. And they said, hey, we have an open manager role on our team, and we'd like to talk to Carlos about it. He really doesn't have the conventional background of the people that we have had on our team in the past, but they said there's something about him, and he has enough other transferable skills that we think he's a really interesting candidate for this role. Would you be okay with, and do you support us talking to him? And I remember that very clearly, because I was so excited for you to have that opportunity, because I thought they were right. You did have a lot of those skills that, but also a very keen operational understanding that lends credibility when someone's in that kind of a role. And so I thought it was a great fit. It was a great opportunity for you. And I'm just really proud that they were seeing that, you, and that you had that opportunity.
It's thank you for sharing that again. It just sends me back to those memories where I was really, again, this is one of the things I'm very proud in my career, is like being with you really was a great season in my career, because I learned a lot of leadership lessons from you. And then moving to this team who were very respected in the organization. So we send greetings to the LOD team, Mike Murphy, Shay, Doug, Debbie, Bill, and all that. Like, to me, it was a season of growth.
Yeah.
I really wanted to challenge myself, because I knew that if I moved there, I was going to have to improve my communication skills. And that was an area that I was very interested. I also wanted to learn the angle of leadership in the context of operations.
Right.
And so I thought that was a very move. And thank you for supporting me in that career change. Yeah.
That was wonderful. And for me, that was a highlight. And it kind of goes back to that idea that you think about what makes an effective leader. And one of the things surely is that you produce other leaders. And so I felt like that was just a great thing in your leadership development and career path. And I was so happy that they recognized some of those characteristics in you.
Oh, thank you, Kurt. But it was, look at your career after we met. It's so fun, because I can see how you went into different industry. You've taken different roles. So I just want to continue to learn from your career and some of the lessons that you learn along the way, especially in that context of continuous improvement, leadership development, those things. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened after?
Sure. So after HHI, a quick sketch, I went and spent a number of years at a telecommunications services company. So now this is no longer manufacturing, but think more along the lines of a general contractor in terms of building cell networks. Then after that, I went to a state data company, and a completely different industry, no manufacturing, no physical product whatsoever. Bottom line is a couple of very different business models within which to figure out how do you apply these principles and use them in a way that actually supports what the company needs in a very different operating environment. Lots of years of experience comes lots of repetitions, and you not only get to see a lot of different things, but you get a good sense for what works and what doesn't. And I think one of the things that when I look back stands out that is that the challenges for continuous improvement leaders, when you're going to try to make improvements, it's only natural. All the stakeholders are usually starting with some sort of a hypothesis about what the right answer is. And except not everybody recognizes it as a hypothesis. Sometimes they just recognize it as the right answer, and that's it. As a continuous improvement leader, we sometimes think that too. In the back of our minds, we kind of know what the right answer is when we're going into it, even if we don't say it. And so one of the big challenges is how, as a continuous improvement leader, do you get people to let go of those preconceived notions, or at least get them to hold them loosely enough that they can honestly in the discovery process and come to a data-based conclusion. That's a real challenge. And I think approach, for example, DMAIC is one thing that can help with that, because it forces you to go through certain steps to evaluate. Continuous improvement leaders, we have to hold ourselves accountable to let go of what we believe the right answer is. I think in the end, some of the best things to do are just to, number one, continue to emphasize the objective of the initiative and the data. So one line that I've used a lot when I encounter people who kind of know what the right answer is that you may be right. If you are, we're going to let the data prove it. Then I have to tell myself the same thing, right? But I think that's one of the things that I've seen and experienced myself a number of different times is just ways that we have to hold ourselves accountable to and also get other people to let go of the preconceived notions and let the data tell us what the right answer is.
I really like that, Kurt, and thank you for sharing that lesson and I like the part that you talk about us as continuous improvement practitioners to also be accountable to that, because you're right. Sometimes we also bias, which is normal.
Yeah.
At your point, continuing to reflect about ourselves and how well we are others to follow that process and remove ourselves from that, and then let the methodology and the data be the one who drives the initiative or project, I think is important. But even before that, sometimes I've noticed, and this is kind of a challenge, and I'm wondering about how you have your perspective on this, is that you're speaking about problem solving, for example, which is a big topic of continuous improvement. I see leaders, especially as you move up in the organization, that it's easy for leaders to ask others to do problem solving, but it's very challenging sometimes to ask them to do problem solving, right? To tackle some of the organizational challenges that the leadership team is facing using the methodology. And I think the importance of that is, hey, you really talk, right? Or you're really showing how, from a cultural standpoint, we embrace these practices or ideas. So, what is your experience on how to do that?
I'm probably going to answer your question a little bit indirectly, because I think one of the challenges is the people we're trying to support, that we're trying to work with. As continuous improvement leaders, oftentimes, and especially early on when sometimes the program gets started, we're in a position where we know the terminology, we know the tools and the approaches and so on and so forth a lot better than anybody else does. And we've been convinced that they work, but not everybody else has. And so that can be the reason sometimes that don't always get the engagement that we want. And I think one of the things that I've seen just be very important is the idea that you have to be able to read the room, whether it's executive support or whether it's broader stakeholder engagement and support, and see where people are and then be willing to meet them where they're at to engage them in continuous improvement. So, for example, if you run into a group of stakeholders who are very concerned, maybe they've been burned in the past, and they feel like, oh, here we go, it's another flavor of the month type of thing. Well, then I think one way you can address that is just don't be so rigid about using jargon and terminology and all that kind of thing. Just use common sense, everyday language to try to get done what you need to get done. And I think on the other hand, if you feel like you are not getting the top-down support that you want, ways to go about that too. You can still get together a small team of stakeholders. You can use the appropriate tools and approaches. You can make an improvement and measure it and demonstrate it. And then you can go show that to somebody and say, hey, we just want to show you, these are the results we got. And by the way, here's some of the ways we went about getting it. And if you do that enough times, all of a sudden people become a lot more interested in how you're doing this over and over again. And you earn the right to start to incorporate a little more formality.
I love that. I'm listening to you and I get excited just from the advice and the wisdom that you're sharing. I also confirm that was some of the lessons that we learned together.
Mm.
And one of the things that you do very well is listening. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important listening is in the context of continuous improvement. Precisely to your point, to be able to understand the stakeholders, what they need. And to your point, to remove all the terminology and all that, and then just use the right questions to lead the process.
Right.
And my pet peeves, Kurt, is when I go in LinkedIn or any of this platform, is that how much people put emphasis on Lean and Six Sigma and like remove all that and then just concentrate on the process of how to solve problems, how to streamline processes, regardless of what your methodology you use. At the end of the day, I think to your point, it's about understanding the need and then solve the problem, then show the results, because that's going to bring the engagement that it's needed.
Right. And it can be a hard lesson to learn. We don't necessarily know that when we're new black belts or whatever, first starting out. And sometimes you have to take a few bruises to figure out how to take an approach that actually works.
Yeah. So you share one of the lessons is driven decisions. Then we also, as we were talking, learn about the importance of listening and understanding the need, and then to the result, and then use that result to create the engagement. Any other lessons that you want to share with?
Well, I think, and this ties to the other two. We've probably all seen. You spend any amount of time in the continuous improvement world, and you probably will see people who struggle in it. And one of the ways that I've seen people struggle in it is if they're in a continuous improvement leadership role and trying to make a name for themselves. And I'll explain why, but I think that's a contradiction if you're trying to build a strong continuous improvement culture. What I've seen is the best way to build that culture is if the person who's a continuous improvement leader really takes the posture of, my job is to make the operational process owners successful. And there's no world in which I can be successful, but they're not. So once you dispense with that idea and say our success is tied together, either both succeed or we both fail, but there's no way I can succeed as a continuous improvement leader without the operational process owner also succeeding. So that's a very important point, and it requires a certain degree of humility and a certain degree of people being willing to play something of a background role, being willing to pursue an objective where the operations team, that results show up in their numbers and that they're recognized for it. Now, most of the time in a healthy organization, the continuous improvement leader will also be recognized. But if that becomes too much of the main point, then culturally that won't work. So I think that's my encouragement to want to build a successful continuous improvement culture, is you need people in those roles who are willing to take as their main objective the success of others.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think back to the point of humility, it's something that we try as we are trying to develop this culture of continuous improvement, is have leaders that are showing humility. But then, to your point, is modeling that, starting with, if you're a continuous improvement leader or you have that responsibility yourself, and becoming kind of a servant leader in that sense of, okay, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve? And then how can I help you to get there? Rather than back to the idea of, oh, but I want this value stream map to be applied, or I want this many Kaizens or whatever, like on what is it that they need, and then support them to achieve that.
That's right.
Yeah, great. One more. Give us one more that you want to share with us as we're going in different roles and doing different things for these organizations.
Well, this one's probably a lot more general, but it's just been fascinating to me. I think I kind of in my mind, but I didn't know it with my experience really the last several years since I left, which is operational excellence principles can be so broadly applied. They don't need to just apply in manufacturing or physical operations. And I saw that so clearly. I had the opportunity to join Cotality. It was really interesting. I had a call from a recruiter, and they told me about the role, and my first thought was, I don't know why they're talking to me, because I've generally come through type companies. This is a real estate data company, and I kind of that question, and they said, no, we get it, but the company kind of thinks that, look, it's all operations. Have inputs, you have outputs, you have customer requirements, and you have a process in between the inputs and outputs that produce the outputs. And kind of like manufacturing, it's just the nature of all that stuff is different, and we're looking for somebody who knows how to do that in manufacturing and can bring that approach here. And I thought, oh yeah, actually probably one of the most interesting intellectual challenges that I can think of. And so I went and did that for 8 years. And I think that was really some of the most fun, was just to find all the ways that you can take concepts that really work operationally well in manufacturing and find that there's a lot of value to be had in applying those to transactional processes that don't produce anything physical well. So that's also something that I think should be an encouragement to improvement folks, especially in manufacturing, that there is such broad applicability of the principles in different business environments. The key is you have to start with understanding, what business am I in right now? What's the business model? How does this business make money? And therefore, how do I reorient the objectives of my continuous improvement efforts to support those things, as opposed to just assuming, for example, that, oh, it's all about cost savings, or it's all about throughput time, or something like that. And those things are generally important, but they're not always the most important thing. And it's important to know that and then make your adjustments in order to be successful doing that.
No, I really that angle of, I like the part that you said about understanding how the company produces money or makes money, because it talks about this challenge of value creation.
Right.
And how in the manufacturing, it's very easy because you can just follow the flow of the material. And then more likely that's where the money is made and the value is delivered. But I think for the advice for people who are not in that industry but still want to apply these ideas, I think you're right. Like having a very good understanding of the industry that you're in, like the company, what is the value chain, and then trying to apply these principles, using that as the core, is important. And I also love what you're saying about away from the idea of only cost savings or even time reduction, but trying to understand more deeply that value, extended value stream map, I think is important.
Right.
Great. Hey, I saw also one more thing that I want to learn from you. I saw also that even probably before the boom of AI, you were already applying and practicing AI, I'm sure in the context of continuous improvement and so on. And I just, in my consulting now, I'm seeing this challenge of organizations who want to do AI, but sometimes we are falling into the same mistake, I think, of what we've seen over the years, which is thinking that if we apply AI, if we push AI to all the staff, then the results are going to be there. And even more probably risky now is that link between AI and productivity. And then the challenge with that, where people now probably are feeling overwhelmed because their leaders are being asked to reduce their headcount, for example, but then AI is actually, in some cases, people be busier because now they can see more problems. Now they can see more opportunities. So, any thoughts on your experience with AI, and would you advise people who are using it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I think in one way it's very similar to some of the patterns we saw many years ago. Any kind of operations when you just about the concept of automation. I mean, AI is far more than automation, but one of the patterns that we used to see is people wanting to jump to a conclusion that a certain type of automation or a certain type of new software or a certain tool was the answer to something that was going to make everything better. Again, perhaps it will. The way that you come to that conclusion is what's very important. And one of the questions that we always had to be sure we asked is, what's the process that we're trying to improve here? And what does the process need to produce in order to create value? And does the automation in question actually help it do that? And how? You have to know those things. And sometimes we would find situations where there's a proposal to automate something that when you really evaluate the process, you realize this is waste in the process. If we automate this, we're just investing in capital expenditure to automate something we don't need to be doing in the first place. And I think that's part of what we need to look at with respect to AI too, is don't get so excited about the power of AI that you start applying it in areas that don't actually produce value. So that's a very important thing. But some of the things that I've seen too that are really interesting is recently I've been advising a stage software company that has a product using AI that looks at processes and basically evaluates all the metadata from those processes and then paints a picture for you to say, this is the pattern of behavior that corresponds to your most successful process outcomes. And conversely, this is the pattern of behavior or the pattern of execution that corresponds to your worst process outcomes. And then it uses that data to provide recommendations for, here's some changes you might consider making or controls you might consider putting into the process to steer it toward those execution modes or behaviors that result in the best outcomes. So there are some really interesting ways that it can really help drive better outcomes and better process execution.
No, I really like your line of questioning that you're sharing with us when it comes to how to truly use AI in a powerful way. I think this is probably giving us some material for our next episode.
Yeah.
Maybe we can dig deeper into AI and the with process improvement, and what are some of the steps that somebody could use to maximize the use of AI to continue to increase value. So I really like that.
Yeah. For a conversation, for sure.
Great. Well, in spirit of respecting your time, I think I know we could continue to talk about more lessons that you learn and your wisdom, but maybe one last point is, if somebody is in the middle of trying to implement all this continuous improvement, or if you're a leader who wants to lead using these principles and ideas, what advice would you give to those individuals who are listening to us?
It's going to go back to something I touched on earlier, which is that I think the healthiest cultures I've seen with respect to continuous improvement are the ones where the continuous improvement leaders were both analytically strong, but also had very high EQ. In other words, they're able to listen, they're able to understand will and won't work, and make adjustments in a spirit and in a posture of genuinely helping the operational teams or whatever functions it is that they're supporting. If you can find people and build a continuous improvement team culture like that, then that's where I've seen teams have the most success.
I really like that. And it goes back to this whole idea of, I always think that as we are teaching a lot of these ideas and principles, to the point that you mentioned about holding yourself accountable to that is important. And isn't it true that continuous improvement and continuous learning go together? So to your point, if you're telling people that you have to embrace change, you have to embrace learning, you being that person who leads by example is going to help to really create that culture of continuous improvement. And so I really think that's very important. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure catching up again and just going through all these stories, Carlos. And like you said, the more we talk, the more comes to mind and the more I think we could talk about, but we'll save that for another day.
Well, thanks, Kurt, for your time, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Sounds great. See you, Carlos.